In the sleepy village of St. Mary's Hollow, where secrets whisper through the hedgerows, the rose and crown and hides a chilling crime. Henry Baxter, the jovial yet miserly innkeeper, is found bludgeoned in his cellar, a poker his grim end. Miss Jane Marple, with her sharp eyes and quiet wisdom, unravels a web of greed and betrayal. Was it his embittered wife, Eliza, the resentful barman, Tom, the secretive guest, Lawrence Gray, or the desperate supplier, Silas Ward? As gold sovereigns vanish and alibis crumble, one truth emerges. In this village, no secret stays buried for long. Join Miss Marple in a twisting tale of murder, where every stitch reveals a killer. Chapter 1. The quiet village of St. Mary's Hollow. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over St. Mary's Hollow, a village so tucked away in the folds of the English countryside that it seemed to exist in a gentler, older time. Its cottages, with their ivy-clad walls and neatly trimmed gardens, clustered around a mossy stone church whose bell tolled with a soothing predictability. The air carried the faint sweetness of honeysuckle, mingling with the earthy scent of freshly turned soil from the fields beyond. At the heart of the village stood the Rose and Crown and its blackened timber beams and low sagging roof, a testament to centuries of welcoming travelers. The inn's sign, painted with a faded rose entwined around a golden crown, creaked gently in the autumn breeze. Miss Jane Marple, seated by the window of the vicarage's cozy drawing room, gazed out at this serene tableau. Her small, bird-like frame was enveloped in a soft shawl, and her hands, delicate but steady, worked a pair of knitting needles with rhythmic precision. She had arrived that morning, at the invitation of her old friend, Mrs. Agnes Clement, the vicar's wife, who had promised a restful fortnight in the country. Yet Miss Marple, with her unerring instinct for human nature, sensed an undercurrent of unease beneath the village's tranquil surface. Her blue eyes, bright and inquisitive behind her spectacles, missed nothing, not the hurried glance of a passing villager, nor the slight hesitation in Mrs. Clement's voice as she poured the tea. "It's such a pity about poor Mr. Baxter," Mrs. Clement said, setting down the teapot with a sigh. Her round face, usually cheerful, was clouded with concern. To think, murdered in his own cellar. The whole village is talking of nothing else. Miss Marple's needles paused for a fraction of a second, her interest piqued. Murdered, you say? How very shocking. And in such a peaceful place as St. Mary's Hollow. Tell me, Agnes, what happened? Mrs. Clement leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as though the very walls might overhear. It was 2 nights ago, Jane. Henry Baxter, the innkeeper at the Rose and Crown, was found dead in the cellar. His head was smashed in. Oh, it's too dreadful to think about. They say it was the poker from his own hearth that did it. The police have been poking about, but they've no clear answers yet. Miss Marple's expression remained serene, but her mind was already at work, sorting and sifting the fragments of this grim tale. A poker, you say? A heavy, domestic thing, not a weapon one would carry about, which suggests the act was meant to seem so. And who found him? The barman, Tom Rudd, Mrs. Clement replied. He came in early the next morning and found the cellar door ajar. Poor man was quite shaken, they say. He ran straight for the constable. Miss Marple nodded, her needles resuming their gentle click. And Mr. Baxter, what sort of man was he? One hears so much about innkeepers, you know. Jolly fellows to some, tyrants to others. Mrs. Clement hesitated, choosing her words with care. Henry was well liked by the travelers, I suppose. Always ready with a laugh and a pint. But he could be sharp, especially with those who worked for him. And there were rumors, nothing certain, mind you, that he was tight with his money. Some say he and his wife Eliza had their share of quarrels over it. Money? Miss Marple murmured, her tone soft but laden with meaning. It does have a way of stirring up trouble, doesn't it? And who else might have had reason to dislike him? Mrs. Clement's eyes widened slightly, as though surprised by the directness of the question. Well, the police have their suspicions, though they're keeping quiet about it. There's Eliza, of course, Mrs. Baxter, I mean. She's a proud woman, but I've heard she and Henry hadn't shared a kind word in months. Then there's Tom Rudd, the barman, who's been with the inn for years, but never seemed fond of his master. There's a guest, too, Mr. Lawrence Gray, some sort of writer, staying at the inn. And oh yes, Silas Ward, the ale supplier. He was there that evening, delivering barrels. They say he and Henry had words over unpaid bills. Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint, thoughtful smile. For suspects, then. A wife, a servant, a stranger, and a creditor. Quite a little circle, isn't it? And all so conveniently close to the scene. Mrs. Clement blinked, caught off guard by the precision of Miss Marple's summary. Why, Jane, you make it sound like one of those dreadful novels, but surely you don't mean to get involved. It's police business, after all. Oh, I shan't interfere, Miss Marple said, her voice mild as milk. But I do find people so very interesting, don't you? And in a village like this, where everyone knows everyone else's business, there's bound to be something that doesn't quite fit. Like a stitch dropped in a pattern it shows, if you know where to look. Double quotes. Mrs. Clement laughed, though a touch nervously. You and your knitting analogies, Jane. But I dare say you're right. St. Mary's Hollow may look peaceful, but it's full of secrets, like any other place. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes drifting back to the window, where the Rose and Crown stood silent against the fading light. A murder, she thought, was like a stone dropped into a still pond. The ripples touched everyone, revealing what lay beneath the surface. And Miss Marple, with her quiet ways and unassuming air, was very good at watching ripples. Chapter 2. The scene of the crime the morning following her arrival in St. Mary's Hollow dawned crisp and clear, with a mist curling gently over the meadows, softening the edges of the village's ancient stone walls. Miss Jane Marple, never one to linger abed when there was something to be learned, rose early, her mind already turning over the fragments of information Mrs. Clement had shared the previous evening. The murder of Henry Baxter, bludgeoned in his own cellar, was a puzzle that demanded closer inspection, and Miss Marple, with her knack for noticing the small, telling details of human behavior, felt a quiet urge to see the Rose and Crown for herself. After a simple breakfast of tea and toast, she persuaded Mrs. Clement to accompany her to the inn. It's only neighborly, Agnes, she said, her tone mild but firm, to pay our respects, even if the inn is closed. And besides, I find old buildings so very full of character, don't you? Mrs. Clement, though hesitant, could hardly refuse her friend's gentle insistence, and so the two women set out, arm in arm, along the cobbled lane that led to the heart of the village. The Rose and Crown loomed before them, its timbered facade somber in the morning light. The windows were shuttered, and the heavy oak door bore a handwritten notice, closed until further notice. A constable, young and pink-cheeked, stood guard, his helmet tucked under one arm as he stifled a yawn. Miss Marple, with her air of harmless curiosity, approached him with a smile that could disarm the sternest official. "Good morning, young man," she said brightly. "Such a dreadful business, this. I don't suppose there's any harm in an old lady like me taking a peek at the inn. My friend Mrs. Clement here assures me it's a fine example of Tudor architecture." The constable, caught off guard by her grandmotherly demeanor, hesitated. "Well, ma'am, it's a crime scene, you see. Inspector Craddock's inside, and he's not keen on visitors." "Oh, of course, I wouldn't dream of interfering," Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling behind her spectacles. "But perhaps you might ask the inspector if he'd mind. I promise we shan't touch a thing." Mrs. Clement opened her mouth to protest, but before she could speak, the constable clearly unused to refusing elderly ladies, ducked inside. Moments later, he returned with Inspector Craddock, a lean, serious man in his 30s, whose sharp eyes softened slightly at the sight of Miss Marple. "Mrs. Clement, good morning," he said, nodding to the vicar's wife. "And this must be your guest. I'm told you're interested in the inn's architecture." Miss Marple's smile was serene. "Among other things, Inspector, I find that old places like this have so many stories to tell. And, of course, one cannot help but be curious about poor Mr. Baxter's fate." Craddock studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. He was young for an inspector, with a reputation for thoroughness, but he was not immune to the charm of an elderly spinster with an air of quiet authority. "Very well," he said at last. "A quick look, mind. The cellar's where it happened, and it's not a pleasant sight." They followed him through the inn's low-ceilinged taproom, where the air still held the faint temps of spilled ale and wood smoke. The tables were cluttered with abandoned tankards, as though the patrons had fled in haste. A narrow staircase led down to the cellar, its stone steps worn smooth by centuries of use. The air grew cooler as they descended, and a damp, earthy smell enveloped them, tinged with something sharp or something metallic. The cellar was a cavernous space, its walls lined with barrels and crates, the floor a patchwork of uneven flagstones. A single electric bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a harsh light over the scene. Miss Marple's eyes, sharp despite her age, took in every detail: the splintered wooden crate in one corner, the neatly stacked barrels along the walls, and, most chillingly, the dark stains spreading across the floor near a heavy oak table. Beside the table lay an iron poker, its tip crusted with a grim reddish-brown residue. The sight was stark, almost theatrical, and Miss Marple felt a pang of sorrow for the violence it represented. "Bludgeoned sometime after midnight, Inspector," Craddock said, his voice clipped as he consulted his notebook. "Dr. Haydock puts the time of death between midnight and 2 in the morning. No sign of forced entry, so we believe it was someone Baxter knew. The poker was taken from the hearth upstairs kept in the taproom for stoking the fire. Whoever did it likely grabbed it on impulse." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze lingering on the poker. "An impulse, you say? Or perhaps a deliberate choice to make it seem so? A poker is such a domestic thing, isn't it? Always close at hand in a place like this." Craddock raised an eyebrow, but he continued. "We've narrowed it down to 4 suspects, based on who was here that night. Mrs. Eliza Baxter, the widow, was upstairs in their quarters. Tom Rudd, the barman, was cleaning the tap room until late. Mr. Lawrence Gray, a guest staying in one of the rooms, claims he was writing all evening. And Mr. Silas Ward, the ale supplier, delivered a load of barrels around 9 and stayed too. Settle accounts with Baxter." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, as though she were tasting the names. "A small circle, Inspector. And all with access to the cellar, I presume." "Exactly," Craddock said. "The cellar door's just off the taproom, and the stairs to the guest rooms are nearby. Anyone could have slipped down here without much notice, but there's no clear motive yet, or rather, too many motives. Baxter wasn't the most popular man in St. Mary's Hollow." Mrs. Clement, who had been hovering nervously at the edge of the group, spoke up. "He could be gruff, Inspector, but surely no one would do this over a quarrel." Craddock's expression darkened. "You'd be surprised, Mrs. Clement. People kill for less than you'd think. A grudge, a debt, a moment of regret. Doesn't take much." Miss Marple, still studying the cellar, stepped carefully toward the stained flagstones, her small feet avoiding the gruesome mark. She bent slightly, as though examining the floor for dust, but her eyes were tracing the layout of the room. The table, sturdy and scarred, stood against one wall, its surface cluttered with a ledger, a quill, and an inkpot. Nearby, a small wooden box, its lid splintered, caught her attention. This box, Inspector, she said, her voice soft. Was it part of the scene? Craddock nodded, his interest piqued by her observation. Yes, we found it like that, pried open, empty. Baxter kept it hidden behind a barrel. We're not sure what was in it, but it's possible it was money. He was known to hoard a bit, according to the locals. Money, Miss Marple murmured, her tone thoughtful. Or something else of value. A box like that, tucked away, suggests a secret, doesn't it? And secrets, in my experience, are often at the heart of such matters. Craddock gave her a sharp look, as though reassessing her. You've a keen eye, Miss Marple. Care to share any theories? Oh, I'm just an old woman who notices things, she said, her smile disarming. But I do wonder, did Mr. Baxter often work in the cellar so late? It seems an odd place for a man to linger, unless he had reason. He was checking the barrels, Craddock said. Ward's delivery came late, and Baxter was particular about his stock. Tom Rudd said he saw him down here around 11, going over the ledger. Miss Marple's eyes flickered to the ledger, its pages slightly askew, as though it had been handled carelessly. And the poker, was it always kept in the tap room, or might it have been brought down here earlier? Craddock frowned, considering. It's usually by the hearth upstairs. No one mentioned moving it, but it's not heavy. Anyone could have picked it up on their way down. Mrs. Clement shivered, clutching her shawl. It's too dreadful, Jane, to think someone stood here, holding that poker, and oh, I can't bear it. Miss Marple patted her friend's arm gently. There, Agnes. It's upsetting, I know, but we mustn't let it cloud our judgment. The truth has a way of revealing itself, if one looks closely enough. They ascended the stairs, leaving the cellars chill behind. In the Miss Marple paused to take in the room's details. The polished oak bar, the rows of tankards hanging above it, the hearth where the poker had once rested. A faint smudge of ash on the floor caught her eye, and she bent to examine it, her fingers brushing the boards lightly. Curious, she murmured, too softly for Craddock to hear. As they stepped back into the sunlight, the inspector turned to her. You've a way of asking questions, Miss Marple. If you notice anything else, anything at all, you'll let me know. Of course, Inspector, she said, her voice all sweetness. I'm only too happy to help, in my small way. As they walked back to the vicarage, Mrs. Clement was quiet, her thoughts clearly troubled. Miss Marple, however, was anything but troubled. Her mind was alive with possibilities. Each detail of the cellar, the stain, the box, the ledger, the poker fitting into a pattern that was only just beginning to form. It's like knitting, Agnes, she said at last, her voice cheerful. You start with a single stitch, and it seems so small, so insignificant. But add another, and soon you see the shape of things. Mrs. Clement glanced at her, puzzled. You're not really talking about knitting, are you, Jane? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Not entirely, my dear, not entirely. Back at the vicarage, as Mrs. Clement bustled off to see to lunch, Miss Marple settled into an armchair by the window, her knitting in her lap. She thought of the cellar, so cold and final, and of the 4 suspects Craddock had named. Eliza Baxter, the widow, who might have grown weary of a difficult husband. Tom Rudd, the barman, whose resentment could have simmered into violence. Lawrence Gray, the mysterious guest, whose polished manners hid something less refined. And Silas Ward, the supplier, whose debts might have driven him to desperation. Each had opportunity, each had motive, but only one had acted. The question was not just who, but why and how the pieces fit together, she thought. 2 of the broken box and its missing contents. Money, Craddock had suggested, but Miss Marple was not so sure. In her experience, people killed for many reasons: fear, revenge, or even to protect a secret. The cellar, with its shadows and secrets, held the key. and she resolved to learn more about the people who had crossed its threshold that night. As the church bell tolled noon, Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, each stitch a step toward clarity. St. Mary's Hollow might seem a haven of peace, but beneath its surface lay a tangle of human passions, and Miss Marple, with her quiet, relentless curiosity, was determined to unravel it. Chapter 3. The Widow's Tale. The following afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the elms that fringed St. Mary's Hollow, Miss Jane Marple made her way back to the Rose and Crown Inn, this time alone. Mrs. Clement, pleading a headache, had stayed behind at the vicarage, though Miss Marple suspected her friend's reluctance stemmed more from unease than ailment. The village was hushed, its usual bustle subdued by the shadow of the recent tragedy. A few curious glances followed Miss Marple as she walked, her black handbag tucked under one arm, her step as sprightly as a woman half her age. She had arranged, through a discreet note sent via the vicarage maid, to call upon Mrs. Eliza Baxter, the innkeeper's widow, under the guise of offering condolences. In truth, Miss Marple's purpose was far less sentimental. She wished to observe the woman whose life had been so violently altered. The inn's parlor, where Mrs. Baxter received her, was a small, dimly lit room off the taproom, its walls adorned with faded prints of hunting scenes and a single, tarnished mirror above a chipped mahogany sideboard. The air carried the faint mustiness of disuse, overlaid with the lingering scent of lavender water. Eliza Baxter sat in a high-backed chair by the unlit hearth, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She was a striking woman, perhaps in her mid-40s, with dark hair swept into a severe bun and eyes that held a guarded intensity. Her morning dress, though neatly pressed, seemed to weigh heavily on her frame, as if it were not just cloth but a mantle of grief, perhaps something else. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Baxter," Miss Marple said, her voice soft and sympathetic as she settled into a chair opposite. "I hope I'm not intruding. I felt it only right to offer my condolences. Such a dreadful loss." Eliza's lips twitched, a gesture that might have been a smile but carried no warmth. "Thank you, Miss Marple. It's kind of you to call. The village has been very attentive, though I confess I'd rather be left alone." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of gentle understanding, though her eyes missed nothing. The slight tremor in Eliza's fingers, the way her gaze flickered toward the door, as if expecting an interruption. "It must be overwhelming," Miss Marple said, "all this attention, and in such trying circumstances. I understand you were asleep when it happened." Eliza's posture stiffened, her hands tightening in her lap. "Yes. I was upstairs, in our quarters. I heard nothing until Tom came banging on the door the next morning, shouting about Henry." Her voice was low, controlled, but there was a brittleness to it, like porcelain on the verge of cracking. Miss Marple tilted her head, her knitting bag resting on her knees, a prop that made her seem all the more harmless. "How very fortunate, in a way, that you were spared the horror of it. The cellar is such a cold, lonely place, isn't it? I saw it yesterday, with Inspector Craddock's permission. Quite chilling, to think of poor Mr. Baxter there, all alone." Eliza's eyes narrowed slightly, but she nodded. "Henry often worked late, checking the stock or the accounts. He liked to keep things in order. I took to retiring early, these past months. We didn't always see eye to eye, you see." Miss Marple's needles, produced almost absently from her bag, began to click softly, a soothing counterpoint to the tension in the room. "Marriages can be trying, can't they? My dear friend Mrs. Bantry, she lives in St. Mary Mead, often says that even the best partnerships have their storms. I suppose you and Mr. Baxter had your share." Eliza's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment Miss Marple thought she might refuse to answer, but then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Henry was not an easy man. He could be generous with the patrons, all smiles and stories, but at home, he was different, sharp-tongued, especially if he'd been drinking. And he was particular about money, always counting, always suspicious. We quarreled, yes, but what couple doesn't? Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes meeting Eliza's with a disarming mildness. Oh, quite. But it must have been difficult, living above an inn, with all its comings and goings. And to sleep through such a commotion, well, you must have been very tired indeed. Eliza's gaze darted to the window, where the fading light cast long shadows across the room. I take laudanum, she said abruptly, for my nerves. It helps me sleep, especially when Henry was difficult. That night I took a dose and went to bed early. I didn't hear a thing. Laudanum, Miss Marple repeated, her tone thoughtful, as though merely noting an interesting fact. Such a help, I'm told, though one must be careful with it. And you heard nothing at all? No voices, no footsteps. The inn is old, and old buildings do creak so. Nothing, Eliza said firmly, though her fingers twisted the fabric of her dress. I woke only when Tom called for me. By then, it was done. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of quiet sympathy, though her mind was racing. Laudanum was a convenient excuse, she thought, for it could explain both deep sleep and deliberate ignorance. She recalled the cellar's proximity to the stairs leading to the Baxters' quarters. Sound would carry. Surely, unless one were truly insensible. And Eliza's demeanor, so controlled, yet so brittle, suggested a woman holding something back. You must feel so alone now, Miss Marple said, her voice gentle. Running an inn is no small task, and without Mr. Baxter, I suppose you'll manage it yourself, or perhaps sell. Eliza's eyes flickered with something anger, perhaps, or fear. I haven't thought that far, she said. The inn was Henry's pride, but it's a burden too. I'll do what I must. Miss Marple rose, smoothing her skirt with a practiced gesture. Of course, my dear, you're very brave to face it all. If you'll permit an old woman's advice, do take care of yourself. Grief has a way of catching up with us, doesn't it? Eliza stood as well, her movements stiff. Thank you, Miss Marple. I'll manage. As Miss Marple stepped back into the tap room, she paused, her eyes sweeping the room once more. The hearth, where the poker had rested, was cold now, its ashes swept clean. She thought of the smudge she'd noticed yesterday, so faint but so telling, and wondered if Eliza had been as unaware as she claimed. A woman living above an inn, even one dosed with laudanum, would surely notice something, a shout, a thud, a stranger's tread on the stairs, unless, of course, she had reason to ignore it. Outside, the village was settling into evening, the air sharp with the promise of frost. Miss Marple walked slowly back to the vicarage, her mind turning over Eliza's words like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. The widow's grief seemed genuine enough, but there was a hardness beneath it, a wariness that spoke of more than marital discord. Money, Eliza had said Henry was particular about it, and the broken box in the cellar, empty of its contents, suggested that money, or something like it, had been at the heart of the crime. At the vicarage, Mrs. Clement was waiting, her earlier headache forgotten in her eagerness for news. Well, Jane, how did you find Mrs. Baxter? Is she bearing up? Miss Marple settled into her favorite armchair, her knitting bag at her side. She's a strong woman, Agnes, but strength can hide many things. She claims she slept through it all, thanks to laudanum. But I wonder, in my experience, people are rarely as unaware as they seem. Mrs. Clement's eyes widened. You don't think she owed Jane? Surely not. Eliza's not the sort to do such a thing. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm. Perhaps not, my dear. But people surprise us, don't they? Like young Tommy Pierce in St. Mary Mead. He seemed such a harmless boy, always whistling, until he was caught stealing from the church poor box. It's the quiet ones, sometimes, who bear watching. As the fire crackled in the vicarage hearth, Miss Marple's thoughts returned to the rose and crown, to the cellar's grim tableau and the widow's guarded eyes. Eliza Baxter was a piece of the puzzle, but whether she was victim, accomplice, or something else entirely remained to be seen. The truth, Miss Marple knew, lay in the small things, the tremor of a hand, the flicker of a glance, the weight of a silence. And she would watch, as she always did, until the pattern emerged. Chapter 4. The Barmans grudged the morning after her visit with Mrs. Baxter. Miss Jane Marple sat at the vicarage breakfast table, her tea cooling as she turned the pages of a small notebook she kept tucked in her knitting bag. Her neat, spidery handwriting recorded the details of the previous day, Eliza's guarded demeanor, the mention of laudanum, the empty box in the cellar. Each fragment was a thread in the tapestry of the crime, and Miss Marple, with her unerring instinct for human nature, knew that the next thread lay with Tom Rudd, the barman. He had found Henry Baxter's body, or so he claimed, and his proximity to the scene made him a figure of interest. She resolved to speak with him, for in her experience, those who discovered a crime often knew more than they let on. Mrs. Clement, bustling about with a tray of scones, noticed her friend's preoccupation. "You're awfully quiet this morning, Jane. Not still thinking about that dreadful business at the Rose and Crown, are you?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled over the rim of her teacup. "Oh, I'm always thinking, Agnes. It's a habit one picks up in a village like St. Mary Mead, where people's lives are so very transparent if one knows how to look. I thought I might take a stroll to the inn again today." The barman, Mr. Rudd, sounds like a young man who might appreciate a kind ear. Mrs. Clement's brow furrowed. "Tom Rudd, he's a sullen sort, Jane always has been. I don't know how he's borne working for Henry Baxter all these years. They say Henry was hard on him always, docking his wages for the smallest thing." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, her tone mild but her interest sharp. "Resentment can be a heavy burden, can't it? I shall have to see for myself." By mid-morning, Miss Marple was once again at the Rose and Crown, her black umbrella serving as both a shield against the light drizzle and a prop for her air of harmless eccentricity. The constable at the door recognized her, and, after a moment's hesitation, allowed her inside, muttering something about Inspector Craddock being in the village square. The tap room was as she had last seen it, its tables still cluttered with the detritus of the fateful night, though the air was now stale, the fire in the hearth long gone out. Behind the bar stood Tom Rudd, a wiry man in his late 20s, his dark hair untidy and his expression one of barely concealed irritation. He was polishing a glass with a rag, his movements jerky, as though the task were a punishment. "Good morning, Mr. Rudd," Miss Marple said, her voice bright as she approached the bar. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I'm Miss Marple, staying with Mrs. Clement at the vicarage. I wanted to offer my sympathies. It must have been such a shock, finding poor Mr. Baxter as you did." Tom's eyes flicked up, wary, but he nodded. It was a shock, miss. Not something you forget, seeing a man like that, all broken." His voice was rough, with a faint tremor that might have been grief or something else. Miss Marple settled onto a stool at the bar, her hands folded neatly over her handbag. "I can only imagine. You must have been very fond of working here, though, to stay so long. The Rose and Crown has such a charming atmosphere, doesn't it? All these old beams and stories." Tom snorted, setting the glass down with a clink. "Charming if you're a guest, maybe. It's hard graft for the likes of me. Baxter wasn't one for making things easy. Always watching, always finding fault. That night, he docked my wages for a broken glass. Said I was careless, though. It was a drunk who knocked it over." Miss Marple's eyebrows rose slightly, her expression one of gentle concern. "How unfair that must have felt. I suppose you were here quite late, then, cleaning up after such a busy evening." "Till near midnight," Tom said, his hands resuming their work, though his eyes avoided hers. I was scrubbing the bar, sweeping the floor. Baxter was in a foul mood, as usual. He went down to the cellar to check the barrel cellars. Ward had brought a delivery late, and Baxter was fussing over it. I left him there and went home. Miss Marple nodded, her needles appearing almost magically from her bag, their soft clicking a counterpoint to the silence that followed. And you saw nothing unusual? No one lingering about the inn, perhaps? It's such an open place, with guests and suppliers coming and going. Tom shook his head, his jaw tight. Nothing out of the ordinary. Just the usual lot, Baxter. Me and that writer fellow, Gray, upstairs. Mrs. Baxter was in her quarters, I reckon. I didn't see Ward after he left, though he and Baxter had a row about money owed. Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes meeting Tom's with a disarming mildness. A row? Oh dear, that must have been unpleasant. Money does cause such trouble, doesn't it? I remember a young man in St. Mary Mead, Teddy Brown, his name was, who got into quite a scrape over a debt. It's surprising how such things can fester. Tom's mouth twitched, as though he wanted to say more, but thought better of it. Well, Baxter owed plenty of folks, from what I heard. But I didn't kill him, miss, if that's what you're thinking. I needed this job, rotten as it was. Of course, Mr. Rudd, Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. No one's suggesting such a thing. But you must have known Mr. Baxter well, working here so long. Was he often in the cellar? At night, do you think? It seems such an odd place for a man to linger. Tom shrugged, his eyes darting to the side. He liked to keep an eye on things, always checking the stock, counting his precious coins. He had a box down there, you know, hidden away. Thought no one knew about it, but I saw him fussing over it sometimes. Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her expression remained serene. A box? How curious. And did you ever see what was in it? Tom hesitated, his fingers tightening on the reg. Money? I reckon gold coins, maybe. He was cagey about it, always locking it up tight. But I never touched it, miss. I'm no thief. Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking steadily. Of course not, Mr. Rudd. You strike me as a hard-working young man, and I'm sure you've had your share of difficulties. It can't have been easy, working for someone so particular. Tom's shoulders slumped slightly, as though her words had disarmed him. It wasn't. He treated me like dirt sometimes, docking my pay, snapping at me in front of the patrons. But I stuck it out. Had to, for my mother's sake. She's not well, and the money keeps us going. Miss Marple's eyes softened, though her mind was cataloguing every word. You're a dutiful son, Mr. Rudd. That's a fine thing. And you? Went straight home after leaving the inn that night. Tom said, but there was a slight hesitation, a flicker in his gaze that Miss Marple noted. Straight home, like I told the inspector. She rose, smoothing her skirt with a practiced gesture. Well, I shan't keep you from your work, Mr. Rudd. Thank you for indulging an old woman's curiosity. I do hope things improve for you, now that things have changed. Tom nodded, his expression unreadable, and Miss Marple stepped out into the drizzle, her umbrella shielding her from the damp. As she walked back to the vicarage, her thoughts were a whirl of impressions. Tom Rudd's resentment was palpable. A slow-burning fire that could easily flare into violence under the right circumstances. His mention of the box was intriguing. Had he truly never touched it? Or was his knowledge of it a clue to something more? And that hesitation when he spoke of going home, it suggested a gap in his story. A moment unaccounted for. At the vicarage, Mrs. Clement was waiting, her hands clasped anxiously. Jane, you've been out in this weather. Did you speak to Tom Rudd? What did he say? Miss Marple settled into her armchair, her knitting bag at her side. Oh, he said a great deal, Agnes, though perhaps not all of it was true. He's a young man with grievances, and grievances can be dangerous. Like young Billy Carter in St. Mary Mead, he held a grudge against the baker for years, and one day he smashed every window in the shop. It's the little hurts that fester. You see, double quotes. Mrs. Clement's eyes widened. You don't think Tom could have? Oh, Jane, surely not. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. I think nothing yet, my dear. But I do wonder about that box in the cellar, and what Tom might have seen or done when he was alone with Mr. Baxter that night. The truth, Agnes, is like a knot in one's knitting. Tug gently, and it comes undone. As the drizzle pattered against the vicarage windows, Miss Marple's thoughts returned to the Rose and Crown, to the barman's sullen face and the hidden box that held secrets worth killing for. Tom Rudd was a piece of the puzzle, but whether he was a victim of circumstance or something darker, only time and careful observation would tell. Chapter 5. The mysterious guest. The soft patter of rain had given way to a brittle autumnal chill by the time Miss Jane Marple set out for the Rose and Crown once more, her sturdy shoes crunching against the gravel path. The village of St. Mary's Hollow lay under a sky heavy with clouds, the air sharp with the scent of damp leaves and wood smoke. Miss Marple, ever observant, noted the way the villagers' glances lingered on her, not with suspicion, but with that peculiar blend of curiosity and deference reserved for an outsider who seemed to know more than she let on. Her conversation with Tom Rudd had left her with a sense of unease, his guarded answers and fleeting hesitations suggesting a man caught in a web of his own making. But today, her thoughts turned to another figure in this grim drama, Mr. Lawrence Gray, the guest at the inn, whose polished manners and vague profession intrigued her. Mrs. Clement had declined to join her, citing a need to prepare for the church. Bizarre, though Miss Marple suspected her friend was growing wary of these excursions into the heart of the village's tragedy. Do take care, Jane, Mrs. Clement had said, her hands fluttering nervously. That Mr. Gray, he's not one of us, you know, a stranger, and strangers always bring questions. Miss Marple had smiled, her eyes twinkling. Oh, I rather like questions, Agnes. They're the threads that lead to answers, after all. The Rose and Crown stood as somber as ever, its shutters drawn like eyelids over a weary face. The constable at the door, now accustomed to Miss Marple's visits, waved her through with a nod, though he warned that Inspector Craddock was out interviewing witnesses. Inside, the tap room was empty, its stillness broken only by the faint creak of floorboards overhead. Miss Marple climbed the narrow staircase to the guest quarters, her steps deliberate, her black handbag clutched firmly. She had sent a polite note to Mr. Gray earlier, requesting a brief chat, and he had agreed, though his reply had been curt, almost reluctant. Lawrence Gray awaited her in a small sitting room at the end of the corridor, a cramped space furnished with a sagging armchair, a writing desk, and a window overlooking the village green. He was a man of about 30, with neatly combed dark hair and a face that was handsome in a studied way, as though he had practiced his expressions in a mirror. His suit, though well-cut, showed signs of wear at the cuffs, and his eyes held a restless quality, darting to the door as Miss Marple entered. A faint whiff of tobacco clung to him, mingling with the sharper scent of ink. "Good afternoon, Mr. Gray," Miss Marple said, her voice as warm as a fireside chat. "Thank you for seeing me. I'm Miss Marple, staying with Mrs. Clement at the vicarage. I hope I'm not interrupting your work. Mrs. Clement tells me you're a writer, and I do so admire those who can weave stories from thin air." Gray's smile was quick, almost too quick, and it did not reach his eyes. "Not at all, Miss Marple. I'm happy to oblige, though I'm afraid my work isn't terribly exciting. Just a novel, you know, bits of adventure and romance. Nothing to trouble a lady like yourself." Miss Marple settled into the armchair, her knitting bag resting on her lap like a faithful companion. "Oh, I'm sure it's fascinating," she said, her tone disarming. "What is it about, if I may ask? I've always thought writers must see the world so differently, always noticing the little things. Gray shifted in his seat, his fingers toying with a fountain pen on the desk. It's a tale of a man on the run, seeking his fortune. Set in far-off places, exotic lands, danger at every turn. I was working on it the night Mr. Baxter met his end. Up here, until, well past midnight. Miss Marple's needles appeared, their gentle clicking a soothing backdrop to the conversation. How industrious of you, Mr. Gray. And you heard nothing unusual that night. The inn is so full of sounds, isn't it? Creaking floors, voices carrying from below. I imagine it's hard to concentrate with all that going on. Nothing out of the ordinary, Gray said, his voice smooth but his eyes wary. Just the usual noises an old place like this never really settles. I was lost in my writing, you see. Didn't notice much else. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of innocent curiosity, though her mind was cataloging every nuance. The faint tremor in Gray's hand as he gripped the pen, the way his gaze slid away from hers, it was as though he were reciting a prepared script. One he wasn't entirely comfortable with. You must have a remarkable imagination, she said, and such discipline, to write so late. Did you know Mr. Baxter well? I understand he was quite a character, always bustling about the inn. Gray's smile tightened. Not well, no. He was civil enough, brought me a tray of supper now and then, made small talk about the weather. But I kept to myself, mostly. Writers do, you know. Of course, Miss Marple said, her needles pausing as she leaned forward slightly. Though I imagine you must have seen things, being a guest here. People coming and going, tempers flaring. I heard Mr. Baxter had a sharp side, especially with his staff. And there was that business with the supplier, Mr. Ward, wasn't there? An argument, I believe. Gray's eyes flickered, a momentary crack in his composure. I heard raised voices that evening, yes. Down in the tap room, before I went upstairs. Baxter and Ward, I think, going on about payments. But it wasn't my business, and I didn't linger. Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. How wise of you, though it's curious, isn't it, how much one overhears in a place like this. I remember a young man in St. Mary Mead, George Eliot. His name was no relation to the novelist who claimed he never eavesdropped, yet he always knew everyone's secrets. It's human nature, I suppose, to notice things. Gray's fingers tightened on the pen, the knuckles whitening. I try not to notice too much. Miss Marple keeps things simpler. She nodded, as though satisfied, though her mind was far from it. The scent of tobacco, the ink-stained fingers, the nervous energy in his movements, it all painted a picture of a man who was more than he seemed. And his claim of writing late into the night felt rehearsed, like a line from one of his supposed novels. She thought of the cellar, so close to the stairs leading to these rooms, and wondered how a man so observant could have missed the sounds of violence below. Well, I shan't keep you from your work, Miss Marple said, rising with a graceful ease that belied her years. It's been such a pleasure to meet a writer, Mr. Gray. I do hope your novel finds success. Perhaps I'll read it one day. Gray stood, his smile returning, though it was strained. Thank you, Miss Marple. I hope so too. As she descended the stairs, Miss Marple's thoughts were a whirl of impressions. Lawrence Gray was polished, yes, but there was a roughness beneath the surface, a tension that suggested he was hiding something. His story of writing all night was plausible, yet it lacked the ring of truth. And that flicker in his eyes when she mentioned the argument between Baxter and Ward, it was as though he knew more than he was willing to share. Outside, the clouds had parted, casting a pale light over the village. Miss Marple paused by the ensign, her eyes tracing the faded rose and crown. She thought of the broken box in the cellar, the missing coins, and Gray's vague profession. A writer, he claimed, but his hands bore no calluses from a pen, only the faint smudges of ink, as though applied for effect, and the tobacco strong, not the mild blend a gentleman might smoke. It reminded her of a man in St. Mary Mead, a so-called artist who turned out to be a smuggler. His sketches a cover for coded messages. Back at the vicarage, Mrs. Clement was sorting linens for the bazaar, her face brightening at Miss Marple's return. "Jane, you're back. Did you speak to that Mr. Gray? What's he like?" Miss Marple settled into her armchair, her knitting bag at her side. "A charming man, Agnes, in his way. But charm can be a mask, can't it? Like young Mr. Lawson in St. Mary Mead, he had such a winning smile, until we found he'd been forging checks. Mr. Gray says he was writing all night, but I wonder. A man so alert to his surroundings would surely notice something amiss." Mrs. Clement's hands paused, her eyes wide. "You think he's lying, Jane? Oh, surely he wouldn't. Not murder." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "I think nothing yet, my dear. But I do think Mr. Gray is not quite what he seems. And in a village like this, where secrets are so hard to keep, that makes him very interesting indeed." As the afternoon faded into evening, Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on Lawrence Gray, on the Cellar's grim secrets, and on the delicate threads of truth that were beginning to weave together in her mind. The puzzle was far from solved, but each conversation, each glance, brought her closer to the pattern she sought. Chapter 6. The supplier's delivery the next morning dawned with a brittle clarity. The sky over St. Mary's Hollow, a pale blue streaked with wisps of cloud. Miss Jane Marple, ever an early riser, sat by the vicarage window, her knitting needles moving with their usual steady rhythm as she contemplated her next step. Her conversations with Eliza Baxter, Tom Rudd, and Lawrence Gray had woven a delicate web of suspicion, each thread revealing a glimpse of motive or opportunity. Yet the picture remained incomplete, and her thoughts now turned to the fourth suspect. Silas Ward, the ale supplier, whose late delivery on the night of Henry Baxter's murder placed him at the scene. A man with debts, she had heard, and debts, in Miss Marple's experience, could drive even the most genial soul to desperation. Mrs. Clement, bustling in with a tray of tea and biscuits, noticed her friend's pensive expression. "Jane, you're plotting again, aren't you? I can always tell when you're turning something over in that mind of yours. Are you off to the Rose and Crown again?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled as she set her knitting aside. "Not today, Agnes. I thought I might take a walk to the edge of the village, where Mr. Ward keeps his brewery. A man who supplies ale to an inn like the Rose and Crown must have stories to tell, don't you think? And I do so enjoy a chat with someone who knows their trade." Mrs. Clement's brow furrowed. "Silas Ward, oh, he's a loud one, Jane, always laughing and clapping folks on the back. But they say his brewery's in trouble. Henry Baxter owed him quite a sum, and Silas wasn't shy about saying so. Do be careful, won't you?" Miss Marple smiled, her expression as serene as ever. "Oh, I'm always careful, my dear. But a man like Mr. Ward, with his booming voice and his troubles, well, he's bound to let something slip, if one listens closely." Armed with her umbrella and her ever-present black handbag, Miss Marple set out along the winding lane that led to the outskirts of the village. The brewery, a squat stone building with a sagging roof, stood beside a sluggish stream, its air heavy with the yeasty temps of fermenting ale. Barrels were stacked haphazardly outside, and a cart, its wheels caked with mud, stood ready for the day's deliveries. Silas Ward was there, heaving a barrel onto the cart with a grunt, his burly frame moving with the ease of long practice. He was a man in his 50s, broad-shouldered and ruddy-faced, with a shock of graying hair and hands roughened by years of labor. His eyes, however, held a sharpness that belied his jovial demeanor. "Good morning, Mr. Ward," Miss Marple called, her voice bright as she approached. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I'm Miss Marple, staying with Mrs. Clement at the vicarage. I've heard such fine things about your ale, and I thought I'd see where it's made. It's such a craft, isn't it, brewing? Silas wiped his hands on his apron, his face breaking into a grin that was equal parts charm and calculation. Well now, that's kind of you, Miss Marple. Not many take an interest in the brewery these days. Care for a look around? It's not much, but it's mine. Miss Marple accepted with a nod, following him into the brewery's cool interior, where the air was thick with the scent of malt and hops. Barrels lined the walls, and a great copper vat gleamed in the dim light, as Silas explained the brewing process, his voice booming with pride. Miss Marple listened attentively, her eyes taking in the man as much as the machinery. His hands, she noted, were strong enough to wield a poker with force, and his easy manner seemed practiced, as though he were accustomed to winning people over. You must be very busy, she said, her tone admiring, supplying the rose and crown and other ends besides. I understand you were there the night poor Mr. Baxter met his end. Such a terrible thing. Silas's grin faded, though his eyes remained sharp. Terrible it was. I was there, delivering a load of barrels. Around 9. Baxter was in one of his moods, fussing over the order, checking every cask like I'd short him. We settled accounts, and I left him in the cellar, alive and well. Miss Marple's needles, produced from her bag, began their gentle clicking, a soothing counterpoint to the brewery's hum. How trying that must have been, Mr. Ward, dealing with such a particular man. I heard he could be difficult about payments. Silas's jaw tightened, and he set a barrel down with a thud. Difficult's putting it mildly, Miss. Baxter owed me for 2 months' deliveries, near £50, and that's no small sum for a man like me. We had words that night, I won't deny it. He promised to pay next week, but I'd heard that before. Still, I didn't bash his head in, if that's what you're getting at. Miss Marple's eyes widened, all innocence. Oh goodness, no, Mr. Ward. I wouldn't dream of suggesting such a thing. But it must have been frustrating, waiting for what was rightfully yours. In St. Mary Mead, we had a grocer, Mr. Tuttle, who was slow to pay his suppliers, and it caused such a stir. People do get desperate, don't they? Silas grunted, his hands busy with a rope securing the barrels. Desperate, aliam bad. Iame patient man. Miss, business is business, and Baxter's custom was worth keeping, even if he was a miser. I left him in that cellar, counting his coins like always, and went home to my wife. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of gentle curiosity, though her mind was sifting through his words. Counting his coins, she repeated softly. He did seem fond of his money, didn't he? I saw that little box in the cellar broken open, quite empty. Such a pity, to lose something so carefully hidden. Silas's eyes flicked to her, a momentary wariness crossing his face. Box, I heard about that. Probably his stash. Baxter was always squirreling away a bit of gold. But I didn't touch it, miss. I'm no thief, and I'm no killer. Of course not, Miss Marple said, her voice soothing. You strike me as a practical man, Mr. Ward, one who knows how to manage in tough times. It can't be easy running a brewery when payments are delayed. Silas's shoulders relaxed slightly, as though her words had disarmed him. It's not, miss. The brewery's been in my family 3 generations, but it's hanging by a thread. Baxter's debt wasn't the only one, but it stung, I'll admit. Still, I'd not risk my neck over it. Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes meeting his with a disarming mildness. And you saw no one else that night? No one lingering about the inn, perhaps? It's such a busy place, with guests and staff moving about. Just the usual, Silas said, his tone dismissive. Tom Rudd was cleaning the tap room, surly as ever. That writer, Gray, was upstairs. Saw his light on as I left. Mrs. Baxter, I didn't see, but she keeps to herself. No one else about. far as I know." Miss Marple smiled, rising from the stool where she'd perched. "Well, I shan't keep you from your work, Mr. Ward. Thank you for showing me your brewery. It's quite impressive. I do hope things improve for you, now that things have changed." Silas nodded, his grin returning, though it was less certain than before. "Thank you, miss. I'll manage." As Miss Marple made her way back to the village, the stream gurgling beside her, she turned over Silas Ward's words in her mind. His frustration with Baxter was clear, his financial troubles a motive that could not be ignored. Yet his manner was too open, too hearty, as though he were performing for an audience. She thought of the cellar, of the broken box and its missing contents, and wondered if Silas's patience had truly held her, if it had snapped in a moment of rage at the vicarage. Mrs. Clement was waiting, her hands clasped anxiously. "Jane, you've been to see Silas Ward. What did he say? He's such a big man. I always thought he could crush a stone with those hands of his." Miss Marple settled into her armchair, her knitting bag at her side. "He's a man under pressure, Agnes, and pressure can do strange things. Like poor Mr. Higgs in St. Mary Mead, who lost his farm to debts and took to breaking into barns. Silas says he left Baxter alive, but his anger was plain, and anger, my dear, is a spark that can ignite the driest tinder." Mrs. Clement's eyes widened. "You don't think he owed Jane? Surely not." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "I think nothing yet, my dear. But I do wonder about that box, and what Silas Ward might have done if he saw it, open and tempting, in the cellar that night. The truth, Agnes, is like a skein of wool angled at first, but with patience it unravels." As the afternoon light faded, Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on Silas Ward, on his strong hands and his strained smile, and on the delicate threads of motive that were beginning to form a pattern in her mind. The puzzle of Henry Baxter's death was far from solved, but each conversation brought her closer to the truth. Chapter 7. The Village Whispers. The days following Miss Jane Marple's visit to Silas Ward's brewery were filled with the quiet hum of St. Mary's Hollow settling into its autumn routine, though the shadow of Henry Baxter's murder hung over the village like a persistent fog. The church bell tolled with its usual solemnity, the hedgerows glowed with the last of the season's berries, and the villagers went about their tasks with a subdued air, their conversations laced with speculation. Miss Marple, ever attuned to the undercurrents of small communities, knew that the true heart of a village lay not in its public spaces, but in its private whispers, the gossip shared over teacups, the rumors murmured in the butcher's queue. It was here, she decided, that she would find the next pieces of the puzzle surrounding the Rose and Crown's grim tragedy. Mrs. Clement, ever a willing, if slightly anxious accomplice, agreed to host a small gathering of the village's most talkative matrons for afternoon tea. "It's for the church bazaar, Jane," she said, though her eyes betrayed her suspicion that Miss Marple's motives were less charitable than charitable. "But I know you'll have them talking about more than tablecloths and jam recipes." Miss Marple's smile was serene as she arranged her knitting bag beside her favorite armchair in the vicarage parlor. "Oh, Agnes, a village is like a garden, isn't it? The most interesting things grow in the corners, where no one thinks to look. I'm only curious to hear what our neighbors have to say." By 3 o'clock, the parlor was filled with the soft clink of teacups and the murmur of voices. The guests included Mrs. Price, the postmistress, whose sharp eyes missed little; Mrs. Harrow, the baker's wife, whose tongue was as quick as her husband's ovens; and Miss Lottie Green, an elderly spinster with a memory for scandal that stretched back decades. The conversation began, innocently enough, with talk of the bazaar and the weather, but Miss Marple, with her gentle nudges and well-timed silences, soon steered it toward the Rose and Crown. "It's such a pity about poor Mr. Baxter," she said, her needles clicking softly as she poured tea with a practiced hand. "I've been hearing so Much about him you know, from Mrs. Baxter and the others. He must have been quite a figure in the village, running such a busy inn. Mrs. Price, her pince-nez glinting, leaned forward. Oh, he was a figure all right. Miss Marple all smiles for the travelers, but a different man behind closed doors. Why, I've heard him shouting at poor Tom Rudd from clear across the square. Docked his wages for the smallest thing, spilled pint, a smudge on a glass. It's a wonder Tom stayed as long as he did. Miss Marple's eyebrows rose, her expression one of mild surprise. How trying for Mr. Rudd. I spoke to him, you? No, and he did seem burdened. Though he mentioned a box in the cellar, something Mr. Baxter was particular about. Do you suppose it was money he kept there? Mrs. Harrow, her cheeks flushed from the tea and the gossip, nodded eagerly. Money most like. Henry Baxter was tight as a drum, always counting his coins. My husband delivered bread to the inn, and Baxter would haggle over every loaf, then pay late, if he paid at all. I reckon that box held his gold sovereigns. He didn't trust banks, they say. Miss Lottie Green, her voice thin but sharp, chimed in. He didn't trust anyone, that man, not even his own wife. I saw them once, outside the inn, arguing fit to wake the dead. Eliza was in tears, saying he'd never give her a penny for herself. She's a proud woman, mind you, but even pride bends under a man like that. Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes meeting Mrs. Green's with a gentle curiosity. An argument, you say? How distressing. I suppose Mrs. Baxter must have felt quite trapped, living above an inn with so many eyes on her. Oh, aye, Mrs. Price said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. And those eyes saw plenty. That guest, Mr. Gray, he's a queer one, isn't he? Calls himself a writer, but he keeps to himself, always coming and going at odd hours. Jenny, the maid at the inn, told me she saw him sneaking out one night, carrying a satchel and looking like he'd seen a ghost. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, though her expression remained serene. Sneaking out, how curious. I spoke to Mr. Gray, and he mentioned working late on his novel. Though I must say, he didn't strike me as the literary type. Do you suppose he was meeting someone? Mrs. Harrow's eyes widened. Meeting someone, or up to no good? Jenny said. His boots were muddy when he came back, and he was in a right state, fussing over that satchel. I wouldn't be surprised if he's not what he seems, a gentleman, my foot. Miss Lottie Green nodded sagely. Strangers always bring trouble. Like that peddler who came through St. Mary's Hollow 20 years ago, sold fake tonics, and vanished with half the village's savings. Mr. Gray's got that same shifty look, if you ask me. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind cataloguing each tidbit. The gossip was a rich tapestry, woven from half-truths and sharp observations, and she knew better than to dismiss it. In St. Mary Mead, it was often the village chatter that led to the truth, like the time Mrs. Wicks, the laundress, had noticed a stain on a curate's shirt that unraveled a theft. She turned the conversation to Silas Ward, the ale supplier, with a delicate touch. And Mr. Ward, she said, her voice soft, he must be feeling the loss of Mr. Baxter's custom. I visited his brewery yesterday, so impressive though. He mentioned some difficulties with payments. Mrs. Price snorted, adjusting her pince-nez. Difficulties? Silas Ward's brewery is on its last legs, Miss Marple. He's been borrowing from half the village to keep it going. Baxter owed him a pretty sum, and Silas wasn't quiet about it. I heard them arguing myself, a week before the murder, right in the post office. Silas said he'd not deliver another barrel till Baxter paid up. Mrs. Harrow leaned in, her voice low. And the night it happened, my husband saw Silas's cart outside the inn longer than usual. Past 10, it was, when most deliveries are done by 9. Makes you wonder what kept him. Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, her eyes bright with interest. How very observant of your husband, Mrs. Harrow. It's the little things, isn't it, that tell a story. Like the time in St. Mary Mead, when young Sally noticed a stranger's bicycle outside the vicarage at midnight. It turned out to be a burglar casing the place. The women nodded, their faces alight with the thrill of speculation, and the conversation flowed on, touching on other village matters before circling back to the murder. Miss Marple listened, her gentle prompts drawing out details. Eliza Bat's pride, Tom Rudd's sullenness, Lawrence Gray's nocturnal wanderings, Silas Ward's financial woes. Each piece was a thread, and though the pattern was not yet clear, she felt it taking shape. As the guests departed, their teacups empty, and their gossip exhausted, Mrs. Clement turned to Miss Marple, her hands clasped. "Jane, you've got them talking like magpies. Did you learn anything useful, or was it all just tittle-tattle?" Miss Marple smiled, her knitting bag resting on her lap. "Oh, Agnes, there's no such thing as just tittle-tattle. Every word is a stitch in the pattern. Mrs. Baxter's quarrels, Mr. Rudd's grievances, Mr. Gray's midnight jaunts, Mr. Ward's debts, they all tell a story. The trick is knowing which threads to pull." Mrs. Clement's eyes widened. "You don't think they're all involved, do you?" "Oh, Jane, it's too dreadful." Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm. "Not all, my dear, but perhaps more than one. Like the time in St. Mary Mead when the grocer's boy and the butcher's apprentice both had a hand in a theft, though only one held the knife. I shall have to look a little closer, I think." As the evening settled over the vicarage, Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on the village whispers, each one a clue to the human passions that had led to Henry Baxter's death. The box in the cellar, the missing coins, the arguments and secrets, they were all part of the tapestry, and she was determined to weave them together until the truth was laid bare. Chapter 8. The missing sovereigns. The pale light of a late autumn morning filtered through the vicarage windows, casting long shadows across the parlor where Miss Jane Marple sat, her knitting needles moving with their familiar soothing rhythm. The past few days in St. Mary's Hollow had been a whirl of conversations and observations, each encounter with the suspects Mrs. Baxter, Tom Rudd, Lawrence Gray, and Silas Ward adding a new thread to the intricate tapestry of Henry Baxter's murder. The village gossip, so freely shared over tea, had painted a vivid picture of grudges and secrets, but it was a single detail, mentioned almost in passing by Inspector Craddock during a chance meeting at the village shop, that now occupied Miss Marple's thoughts: the small splintered box found in the cellar. Its contents several gold sovereigns missing, a robbery. Then Craddock had declared, his voice firm with the confidence of youth. "That's the motive, Miss Marple. Someone knew about Baxter's hoard and killed him to get it." But Miss Marple, with her knack for seeing beyond the obvious, was not so certain. A robbery could be a motive, yes, but it could also be a mask, a convenient explanation to obscure a deeper truth. She resolved to return to the Rose and Crown, to examine the cellar once more, and to ponder the significance of those missing coins. Mrs. Clement, ever anxious about her friend's forays into the village's dark corners, tried to dissuade her over breakfast. "Jane, you've been to that in half a dozen times already. Surely the police can handle things now. It's not safe, poking about in a place where a murder's been done." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled as she sipped her tea. "Oh, Agnes, it's precisely because a murder's been done that one must poke about. The cellar, you see, is like the heart of the inn. It holds its secrets, and I'm rather curious about that box. In St. Mary Mead, we once had a theft at the vicarage, and it was a hidden drawer in an old desk that gave the thief away. I wonder if this box might do the same." Mrs. Clement sighed, knowing better than to argue. "Well, do take care, Jane. And don't go upsetting Inspector Craddock. He's already looking frazzled." Armed with her umbrella and her black handbag, Miss Marple made her way to the Rose and Crown, the village stirring around her, with the quiet rhythm of a weekday morning. The inn's facade was as somber as ever, its sign creaking faintly in the breeze. The constable at the door, now thoroughly accustomed to her visits, waved her through with a resigned smile. "Inspector's downstairs, Miss Marple," he said. "Mind your step, the cellar's damp today." The tap room was unchanged, its table still littered with the remnants of that fateful night, though a faint layer of dust now coated the tankards. Miss Marple descended the narrow staircase to the cellar, her steps careful on the worn stone. The air was colder than before, heavy with the scent of damp earth and stale ale, and the single bulb overhead cast stark shadows across the flagstones. Inspector Craddock was there, crouched beside the oak table, examining the splintered box with a magnifying glass. He looked up as she approached, his expression a mix of exasperation and reluctant respect. "Miss Marple," he said, straightening, "I might have known you'd turn up again. Come to admire the architecture, have you?" Miss Marple's smile was disarming. "Oh, Inspector, you do tease. I was rather curious about that box you mentioned, the one that held the sovereigns. It's such a small thing, isn't it, to cause so much trouble?" Craddock gestured to the box, its lid hanging askew, the wood splintered where it had been forced open. "Small, but significant. We found traces of wax inside, suggesting it was sealed tight. Baxter must have kept it hidden behind that barrel. There only someone who knew the cellar well would have found it. And the sovereign's gold, not paper, aren't easy to trace, which makes our job harder." Miss Marple bent slightly, her eyes tracing the box's rough edges. It was no larger than a cigar box, its lock broken but sturdy, designed to keep its contents safe. "Gold sovereigns," she murmured. "Such a tempting prize. And yet, Inspector, I wonder, would someone kill for a handful of coins, or was the robbery a distraction, perhaps?" Craddock's eyebrows rose, his interest piqued. "A distraction? You think the killer took the coins to throw us off?" Miss Marple's needles appeared, their gentle clicking a counterpoint to the cellar's chill. "It's possible, isn't it? In St. Mary Mead, we had a case once where a thief stole a silver teapot, but it was the letters hidden inside it. That mattered. The coins may be important, but they may also be hiding something else, something Mr. Baxter valued even more." Craddock frowned, his notebook open in his hand. "It's a thought, I'll grant you. But we've no evidence of anything else missing. Baxter's ledger is still here, his papers in order. The only thing gone is the money, and that points to robbery." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene, though her mind was racing. She stepped closer to the table, her eyes lingering on the ledger, its pages slightly curled from the damp. "This ledger," she said, "did Mr. Baxter keep it here in the cellar, or was it brought down that night?" "Here, mostly," Craddock said. "Tom Rudd said Baxter liked to work in the cellar when it was quiet, kept the ledger and the box tucked away. He was obsessive about his accounts, by all accounts." "By all accounts," Miss Marple repeated softly, her lips curving into a faint smile. She thought of Tom Rudd's mention of the box, of Silas Ward's debts, of Lawrence Gray's nocturnal wanderings, and of Eliza Baxter's laudanum-induced sleep. The cellar was a nexus, a place where all their paths converged, and the box was its silent witness. She moved to the barrel where the box had been hidden, noting the narrow gap behind it, barely wide enough for a hand to reach. "Only someone familiar with this cellar could have known it was here," she said, almost to herself. "Someone who watched Mr. Baxter closely, perhaps, or someone he trusted enough to let near his secrets." Craddock's eyes narrowed. "You're thinking one of our four, aren't you? Eliza, Tom, Gray, or Ward. They all had access, but none of them's admitted to knowing about the box except Tom, and he swears he never touched it." Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze meeting Craddock's with a disarming mildness. "People rarely admit to everything," Inspector. But they do leave clues, in their words, their glances. I wonder, did you find anything else in the cellar? A footprint, perhaps, or something out of place? Craddock hesitated, then gestured to a corner near the stairs. Not much, but there was a smudge of ash, like from the hearth upstairs. Could have come from the poker, or someone's shoe. It's not much to go on. Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her expression remained unchanged. She recalled the faint smudge she'd noticed in the tap room, so easily overlooked. Ash, she said softly. How curious. A small thing, but small things can tell such stories, can't they? As they ascended the stairs, leaving the cellar's gloom behind, Miss Marple's thoughts were a whirl of possibilities. The missing were a key, but whether they were the motive or a sleight of hand remained unclear. She thought of the suspects, each with their own reasons to resent Baxter. Eliza's strained marriage, Tom's grievances, Gray's secrecy, Ward's debts. The ash, the box, the ledger. They were all pieces of a puzzle, and she felt the pattern beginning to take shape. Back at the vicarage, Mrs. Clement was waiting, her hands clasped anxiously. Jane, you've been to that cellar again. What did you find? Anything to help the inspector? Miss Marple settled into her armchair, her knitting bag at her side. Oh, Agnes, I found a great deal, though it's not all clear yet. The missing sovereigns are important, but I wonder if they're the whole story. Like the time in St. Mary Mead when Mrs. Pritchard's pearls were stolen, but it was her diary the thief really wanted. The cellar holds more than we see, my dear. Mrs. Clement's eyes widened. You think there's something else down there? Oh, Jane, you're making it sound like a mystery novel. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. Life is rather like a novel, Agnes, if you know how to read it. And I think, before long, we'll turn the page and find the truth. As the afternoon faded into evening, Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on the cellar, on the missing sovereigns, and on the delicate threads of suspicion that were weaving themselves into a pattern only she could see. The truth was close, she felt, but it would take one more tug to unravel it. Chapter 9. The guest's secret. The soft glow of a late afternoon sun filtered through the vicarage curtains, casting a warm light over Miss Jane Marple as she sat in her usual armchair, her knitting needles moving with their steady, hypnotic rhythm. The past days in St. Mary's Hollow had been a tapestry of whispered gossip and careful observation. Each conversation with the suspects, Eliza Baxter, Tom Rudd, Lawrence Gray, and Silas Ward, revealing new facets of the grim puzzle surrounding Henry Baxter's murder. The missing sovereigns, confirmed by Inspector Craddock's discovery in the cellar, had sharpened her focus, but it was a tidbit from the village gossip, shared by Mrs. Price over tea, that now occupied her thoughts. Lawrence Gray, the mysterious guest, seen sneaking out of the inn at night with a satchel, his boots muddy and his demeanor furtive. Such behavior, Miss Marple knew, was rarely innocent, and she resolved to probe deeper into the writer's carefully crafted facade. Mrs. Clement, bustling in with a tray of tea and scones, noted her friend's preoccupied expression. Jane, you're scheming again, aren't you? I can tell by that look in your eye. Are you still thinking about that dreadful cellar? Or is it something else now? Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile as she set her knitting aside. Oh, Agnes, it's always something else, isn't it? I've been thinking about Mr. Gray, the writer at the inn. He's such an intriguing figure, so polished, yet so guarded. I believe I'll pay him another visit. A man who claims to write novels might have a story to tell, even if it's not on the page. Mrs. Clement's hands fluttered nervously. Mr. Gray, oh Jane, he's so slippery, don't you think? All those fine manners, but Jenny, the maid, swears he's up to something. Do be careful, he's not like the folk here. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Careful is my middle name, my dear. But in St. Mary Mead, we had a young man, Mr. Carver, who called himself a poet, yet he turned out to be selling stolen watches. People are rarely what they seem, and I'm rather curious to see what lies behind Mr. Gray's charm. With her black handbag tucked under her arm and her umbrella as a precautionary shield against the unpredictable autumn weather, Miss Marple set out for the Rose and Crown. The village was quiet, its cobbled lanes empty save for a few children playing near the church. The inn loomed ahead, its timbered facade as somber as ever, though the constable at the door had been replaced by a younger officer, who nodded politely as she passed. Inside, the taproom was unchanged, its air heavy with the scent of stale ale and dust. Miss Marple climbed the narrow staircase to the guest quarters, her steps light but deliberate, and knocked gently on the door to Mr. Gray's room. Lawrence Gray opened the door, his expression a mix of surprise and wariness. He was dressed in a slightly rumpled suit, his dark hair neatly combed but his eyes shadowed, as though sleep had eluded him. The faint scent of tobacco clung to him, stronger now, and Miss Marple noted a smudge of ink on his cuff, fresh and deliberate. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth but tinged with unease, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" "Oh, Mr. Gray, I hope I'm not intruding," she said, her tone as warm as a summer afternoon. "I was passing by and thought I'd see how you're faring. It must be so difficult, staying on in a place where such a tragedy occurred. I do admire your resilience." Gray gestured for her to enter, his smile tight. "Kind of you to say. Miss Marple, it's been unsettling, but I manage. Care to sit? I'm afraid I've no tea to offer, but the armchair's comfortable enough." Miss Marple settled into the chair by the writing desk, her knitting bag resting on her lap. The room was, as she remembered, cramped with a sagging armchair, a desk cluttered with papers, and a window overlooking the village green. A satchel, worn and bulging, sat in a corner, its straps tightly fastened. Her eyes lingered on it for a moment before returning to Gray. "You're very kind to indulge an old woman's curiosity," she said. "I was thinking about your novel, a fascinating profession, writing. You must see so much, staying in a busy inn like this." Gray's fingers toyed with a pen on the desk, his movements restless. "It's a living, I suppose. People come and go, and I watch, take notes, but I keep to myself mostly. That night, the night it happened, I was here, working until late. Didn't hear a thing, as I told you before." Miss Marple's needles appeared, their soft clicking filling the silence. "Of course, you did mention that. So industrious. Writing through the night. Though I heard something curious from one of the village ladies, Mrs. Price. I believe about a guest seen leaving the inn late one evening, carrying a satchel. It made me wonder, you know, if you ever take your work elsewhere for inspiration. A walk in the moonlight, perhaps." Gray's hand froze, the pen slipping from his fingers with a faint clatter. "A satchel," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I don't know anything about that. I was here, as I said, writing." Miss Marple's eyes met his, her expression one of gentle concern, though her mind was sharp as a blade. "Of course, Mr. Gray, though it's odd, isn't it, how stories get about in a village. In St. Mary Mead, we had a young man, Mr. Ellis, who was seen slipping out at night, and it turned out he was meeting a married lady, quite the scandal. But you're a writer, so you must know how stories grow." Gray's smile was strained, his eyes darting to the satchel in the corner. "Village gossip, Miss Marple, it's rarely accurate. I did go out one night, I'll admit, to meet a contact in a nearby town, a publisher, you see, interested in my work. I took some pages to show him. Nothing more." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking steadily. "A publisher, how exciting. And you carried your manuscript in that satchel, I presume. It looks sturdy enough for such precious cargo." Gray's gaze followed hers to the satchel, and for a moment, his composure faltered. "Yes, that's right. Just papers, nothing else. I was back before midnight. and I heard nothing of Baxter's trouble. Her eyes lingered on the satchel, noting its bulk, the way it seemed heavier than a mere bundle of papers would warrant. She thought of the missing sovereigns, of the broken box in the cellar, and of Gray's nervous energy, so at odds with his polished exterior. It must have been a tiring journey, she said softly, and to return to such a quiet inn, with Mr. Baxter in the cellar below. Did you see anyone when you came back? Tom Rudd, perhaps, or Mrs. Baxter? No one, Gray said quickly. Too quickly. The inn was quiet. I went straight to bed. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, though her smile remained. How fortunate, to miss all the commotion. Though I imagine you must have passed the cellar stairs on your way up. They're so close to the guest rooms, aren't they? One might almost hear something, even if one were distracted. Gray's fingers tightened on the desk, his knuckles whitening. I heard nothing, Miss Marple. I told you, I was tired. I went to bed. She rose, smoothing her skirt with a practiced gesture. Of course, Mr. Gray, I shan't keep you from your work any longer. It's been such a pleasure to chat. I do hope your novel finds its way to print. It sounds most intriguing. Gray stood, his relief palpable, though poorly concealed. Thank you, Miss Marple. I'll let you know if it does. As she descended the stairs, Miss Marple's thoughts were a whirl of impressions. Lawrence Gray's story was unraveling, his claim of meeting a publisher as flimsy as tissue paper. The satchel, the muddy boots, the nervous glance, they all pointed to a man with something to hide. She recalled the village gossip, Jenny's tale of Gray's furtive return, and wondered what he had carried in that satchel. Papers, he said. But the weight of it suggested something more substantial, something like gold sovereigns. Back at the vicarage, Mrs. Clement was waiting, her hands clasped anxiously. Jane, you've been to see Mr. Gray again. What did he say? Did he admit to anything? Miss Marple settled into her armchair, her knitting bag at her side. Oh, Agnes, he said a great deal, though not all of it was true. He claims he went to meet a publisher, but I think his story is more fiction than his novel. Like young Mr. Tate in St. Mary Mead, who said he was visiting his aunt but was really smuggling cigarettes. Mr. Gray's satchel, I suspect, holds more than papers. Mrs. Clement's eyes widened. You think he took the sovereigns? Oh, Jane, that's dreadful. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. I think nothing yet, my dear. But I do wonder what Mr. Gray was doing that night, and why he's so eager to keep it hidden. The truth, Agnes, is like a loose thread. One good pull, and the whole thing comes apart. As the evening settled over the vicarage, Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on Lawrence Gray, on the satchel that held his secrets, and on the delicate threads of suspicion that were drawing ever tighter around the Rose and Crown. Chapter 10. The Barman's Alibi. The crisp morning air of St. Mary's Hollow carried the faint tang of wood smoke as Miss Jane Marple stepped out of the vicarage, her black handbag tucked under her arm and her mind as sharp as the autumn chill. The puzzle of Henry Baxter's murder was beginning to take shape. Each conversation with the suspects, Eliza Baxter's guarded grief, Tom Rudd's simmering resentment, Lawrence Gray's slippery evasions, and Silas Ward's financial desperation, a new thread to the intricate web. Yet it was a fresh piece of village gossip, overheard by Mrs. Clement at the baker's, that now drew Miss Marple's attention back to Tom Rudd, the barman. A villager had seen him near the Rose and Crown after midnight on the night of the murder, contradicting his claim of going straight home. Such a discrepancy, Miss Marple knew, could be the loose stitch that unraveled a carefully woven alibi. Mrs. Clement, bustling about with her morning chores, had been reluctant to share the gossip, her hands fluttering as she spoke. Jane, I don't like to repeat such things, but Mr. Harrow swears he saw Tom Rudd lingering by the inn's back door, long after he said he'd left. It's probably nothing, Buto. Do you think it means something? Miss Marple's eyes had twinkled over her teacup. Everything means something, Agnes, even the smallest detail. Like the time in St. Mary Mead when young Peter was seen near the grocer's after hours, and it led to the discovery of a stolen sack of flour. I think I shall have another word with Mr. Rudd. A young man with a grudge might have more to say than he realizes. Determined to probe this new lead, Miss Marple set out for the Rose and Crown, her umbrella serving as both a shield against the occasional drizzle and a prop for her air of harmless curiosity. The village was stirring, with the milk cart rattling along the cobbles and a few early risers exchanging greetings in the square. The inn, however, remained a silent sentinel, its shutters drawn and its sign swaying mournfully in the breeze. The constable at the door, now a familiar face, nodded as she approached. "Inspector Craddock's out, Miss Marple," he said, "but Tom Rudd's inside, tidying up. Mind you don't trip on the stairs." The taproom was as she had left it, its tables cluttered with the remnants of that fateful night, now coated with a fine layer of dust. The faint scent of stale ale lingered, mingling with the mustiness of disuse. Tom Rudd was behind the bar, sweeping the floor with a vigor that seemed more about venting frustration than cleaning. His wiry frame tensed as Miss Marple entered, his dark eyes narrowing with a mix of wariness and irritation. "Good morning, Mr. Rudd," she said, her voice bright and disarming as she settled onto a stool at the bar. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I was passing by and thought I'd see how you're managing, with the inn so quiet now. It must be quite a change." Tom's broom paused, his jaw tightening. "Quiet's one word for it, miss. No work, no wages, and the police poking about every day. It's a right mess, and I'm stuck in the middle." Miss Marple's needles appeared from her handbag, their gentle clicking a soothing counterpoint to the tension in his voice. "It does sound trying," she said, her tone sympathetic. "I spoke to you before, you'll recall, and you mentioned leaving the inn around midnight that night, after cleaning up. You must have been exhausted, going straight home to rest." Tom's eyes flicked to hers, a flicker of unease crossing his face. That's right. I told you, I left Baxter in the cellar and went home. Straight to bed, for my mother's sake. She needs me about in the mornings." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of gentle concern, though her mind was sharp. "As a tack, of course, you're such a dutiful son. Though I heard something curious from Mr. Harrow. The baker, he mentioned seeing you near the inn's back door, well after midnight. I thought perhaps you'd forgotten something and returned. It's so easy to misjudge the time, isn't it?" Tom's broom clattered to the floor, his face paling slightly. "Harrow's mistaken," he said, his voice sharp. "I wasn't here after midnight. He must have seen someone else. Plenty of folks pass by the inn at night." Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes meeting his with a disarming mildness. "Oh, I'm sure that's it, Mr. Rudd. Village gossip does get muddled, doesn't it? Like the time in St. Mary Mead when Mrs. Finch swore she saw the postman stealing apples, but it was only a shadow in the orchard. Still, it's curious you mentioned seeing Mr. Baxter in the cellar, counting his coins. Did you notice anyone else about, perhaps, Mr. Gray or Mr. Ward?" Tom retrieved his broom, his movements jerky. "No one, miss. Just Baxter, fussing over that box of his. I told you, I left him there and went home. Didn't see Gray or Ward, nor Mrs. Baxter neither. She was upstairs, like always." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, though her smile remained. "And the box, you said it held coins, didn't you? It must have been tempting, working so close to such a treasure. Not that you'd touch it, of course, but a young man with responsibilities, like yourself, might think about it." Tom's eyes darkened, his grip tightening on the broom. "I'm no thief, Miss Marple. I saw the box, but I never touched it. Baxter was alive when I left, counting those sovereigns like they were his lifeblood. I had no part in what happened after Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene, though her mind was cataloging every nuance. The tremor in his voice, the quick denial, the way his eyes avoided hers, it was as though he were balancing on the edge of a confession. She thought of the ash smudge in the cellar, the broken box, and the missing sovereigns, and wondered if Tom's return to the inn had been as innocent as he claimed. "You're a hard-working young man, Mr. Rudd," she said, rising from the stool. "It can't have been easy, working for someone as demanding as Mr. Baxter. I do hope things improve for you and your mother." Tom muttered a reply, his attention returning to the floor, and Miss Marple stepped out into the drizzle, her umbrella shielding her from the damp. As she walked back to the vicarage, her thoughts were a whirl of impressions. Tom Rudd's alibi had a crack in it, a moment unaccounted for that could mean everything or nothing. His knowledge of the box, his resentment of Baxter, his presence near the inn after midnight, they were all threads in the tapestry, and she felt the pattern growing clearer. At the vicarage, Mrs. Clement was waiting, her hands clasped anxiously. "Jane, you've been to see Tom Rudd again. Did he admit to anything?" "Oh, I can't bear the thought of that poor boy being involved." Miss Marple settled into her armchair, her knitting bag at her side. "Poor boys can do desperate things, Agnes, especially when pushed. Like young Jimmy in St. Mary Mead, who broke into the chemist's shop for medicine he couldn't afford. Tom says he went straight home, but Mr. Harrow's sighting suggests otherwise. I wonder what brought him back to the inn that night." Double quotes. Mrs. Clement's eyes widened. "You think he saw something? Or, oh Jane, you don't think he took those coins?" Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "I think nothing yet, my dear. But I do think Mr. Rudd's story has a hole in it, and holes, in my experience, are where the truth slips through. We shall see, Agnes, we shall see." As the drizzle pattered against the vicarage windows, Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on Tom Rudd, on the broken box and its missing sovereigns, and on the delicate threads of suspicion that were weaving ever tighter around the rose and crown. The truth was close, she felt, but it would take one more careful tug to bring it to light. Chapter 11. The Supplier's Motive. The morning mist clung to the hedgerows of St. Mary's Hollow, softening the outlines of the village's stone cottages as Miss Jane Marple stepped out from the vicarage, her black handbag tucked firmly under her arm. The air was sharp with the promise of frost, and the faint chime of the church bell marked the hour with solemn precision. Her recent conversations with Eliza Baxter, Tom Rudd, and Lawrence Gray had tightened the threads of suspicion around the murder of Henry Baxter, each revealing glimpses of motive and opportunity. Yet it was Silas Ward, the burly ale supplier, whose financial troubles and heated argument with Baxter on the night of the murder now drew her focus. The village whispers, particularly those from Mrs. Price, had confirmed that Ward's brewery was teetering on the edge of ruin, and Miss Marple knew that desperation could turn even a jovial man to violence. Mrs. Clement, stirring a pot of porridge in the vicarage kitchen, had tried to dissuade her friend from another outing. "Jane, you're wearing yourself out with all this traipsing about. Silas Ward's a rough sort, and that brewery's no place for a lady. Why not leave it to Inspector Craddock?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled as she adjusted her hat in the hall mirror. "Oh, Agnes, a brewery's no different from a garden shed. When you come down to it, just a place where people work and worry. And worries, my dear, are what make people act. Like Mr. Stokes in St. Mary Mead, who sold his pigs to pay a debt, and then took to smashing windows when the money ran dry. I shan't be long." With her umbrella as a precaution against the damp, Miss Marple set out for the brewery on the village's edge, her steps brisk despite the chill. The lane wound past fields of stubble, where rooks cawed mournfully, and soon the squat stone building came into view, its chimney puffing faint wisps of steam. The brewery's yard was cluttered with barrels, some weathered and leaking, and Silas Ward's cart stood idle, its wheels sunk slightly into the mud. Ward himself was outside, wrestling a heavy cask into place, his broad frame moving with the ease of long habit. His ruddy face broke into a grin as he spotted Miss Marple, though his eyes held a wary glint. "Well, if it isn't Miss Marple," he boomed, wiping his hands on his apron. "Come to see the brewery again? Or is it my fine company you're after?" His laugh was hearty, but it rang hollow, like a bell with a crack. Miss Marple's smile was warm, disarming in its simplicity. "A bit of both, Mr. Ward. I so enjoyed our last chat, and I thought I'd see how you're managing. With all this trouble at the Rose and Crown, it must be a worry, losing such a customer." Silas's grin faded, his hands pausing on the barrel. "Aye, it's a worry, miss. Baxter's custom was a good chunk of my trade, though he was slow to pay, as I told you. Still, I'd not wish him dead, not even for the £50 he owed me." Miss Marple's needles appeared from her bag, their soft clicking a soothing backdrop to the brewery's hum. £50 is no small sum," she said, her tone sympathetic. "I understand your brewery's been struggling, such a shame, for a family business. In St. Mary Mead, we had a miller, Mr. Grover, who nearly lost everything when a big client defaulted. It does make one desperate, doesn't it?" Silas's jaw tightened, and he hefted the barrel with a grunt, setting it down with more force than necessary. "Desperate's the word, miss. The brewery's been in my family for generations, but it's hanging by a thread. Baxter's debt wasn't the only one, but it rankled. That night, he laughed at me, said he'd pay when he felt like it, as if my livelihood was a joke." Miss Marple's eyes widened slightly, her expression one of gentle concern. "How cruel of him! And you were there so late, delivering those barrels. It must have been tempting, seeing him in the cellar, counting his coins as you said. I heard about that box, such a secret thing, hidden away." Silas's eyes flicked to hers, a momentary flash of unease crossing his face. "I saw him with it, fussing over it like a miser. Gold sovereigns, most like he was always hoarding. But I didn't touch it, miss. I argued with him, sure. But I left him alive, down in that cellar, and went home to my wife." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking steadily. "Of course, Mr. Ward. Though it's curious, isn't it, how long your cart was seen outside the inn that night? Mr. Harrow mentioned it was there past 10, when deliveries usually finish earlier. I suppose you and Mr. Baxter had much to discuss." Silas's hands stilled, his broad shoulders tensing. "Harrow's got sharp eyes, hasn't he?" "We did talk longer than usual. Baxter was checking every cask, dragging it out. I left around 10, maybe a bit after. No crime in that." "No crime at all," Miss Marple said, her voice soothing. "But it must have been frustrating, dealing with such a man. And those sovereigns, so tempting, for a man in need. Not that you'd take them, of course, but one does wonder who might have." Silas's laugh was short, almost a bark. "Plenty might have, miss. Baxter wasn't short of enemies. Tom Rudd, for one, he was always muttering about Baxter's meanness. And that grey fellow, sneaking about like a cat. I saw his light on upstairs when I left, but who knows what he was up to." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, though her smile remained. "How observant of you, Mr. Ward. It's the little things, isn't it, that tell a story. Like the ash I noticed in the cellar, such a small detail, but it might mean something. Did you happen to see anything out of place that night?" Silas shook his head, his expression guarded. "Nothing but Baxter and his box. I was too busy arguing to notice much else. If there was ash, it wasn't from me. I don't smoke, and I didn't touch the hearth." Miss Marple rose, smoothing her skirt with a practiced gesture. "Well, I shan't keep you from your work, Mr. Ward. Thank you for indulging an old woman's curiosity. I do hope your brewery weathers this storm." Silas nodded, his grin returning, though it was strained. "Thank you, miss. I'll get by one way or another." As Miss Marple walked back to the village, the stream gurgling beside the lane, her thoughts were a whirl of impressions. Silas Ward's anger was palpable, his financial straits a motive that could not be ignored. His claim of leaving Baxter alive rang true, yet the lingering cart suggested he had stayed longer than necessary, and his mention of Gray's light. Upstairs it was a detail that aligned with the writer's story, but also placed Silas at the inn at a critical hour. She thought of the ash in the cellar, the broken box, and the missing sovereigns, and wondered if Silas's desperation had pushed him beyond words into action. At the vicarage, Mrs. Clement was waiting, her hands clasped anxiously. "Jane, you've been to that brewery again. What did Silas say? He's such a big man, I can't imagine him doing such a thing, but—" Miss Marple settled into her armchair, her knitting bag at her side. "Big men have big troubles, Agnes, and troubles can make anyone act out of character. Like Mr. Barnes in St. Mary Mead, who broke a man's jaw over a debt he couldn't pay. Silas admits to arguing with Baxter, and his cart was seen late at the inn. I wonder what kept him there, and what he saw in that cellar." Mrs. Clement's eyes widened. "You think he took the coins? Oh, Jane, it's too dreadful." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "I think nothing yet, my dear. But I do think Mr. Ward's anger runs deep, and anger, like a spark, can set a whole house ablaze. We shall see, Agnes, we shall see." As the mist thickened outside the vicarage, Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on Silas Ward, on his clenched fists and his strained grin, and on the delicate threads of motive that were drawing ever tighter around the Rose and Crown. The truth was near, she felt, but it would take one final tug to bring it into the light. Chapter 12. The tapestry complete. The evening sky over St. Mary's Hollow was a deep indigo, streaked with the last embers of sunset, as Miss Jane Marple sat in the vicarage parlor, her knitting needles idle for once in her lap. The past days had been a delicate dance of observation and inquiry. Each conversation with the suspects, Eliza Baxter's brittle grief, Tom Rudd's festering resentment, Lawrence Gray's evasive charm, and Silas Ward's desperate anger weaving a complex tapestry around the murder of Henry Baxter, the missing sovereigns, the broken box in the cellar, the smudge of ash, and the whispers of the village had all converged into a pattern that Miss Marple now saw clearly. It was time, she decided, to gather the threads and reveal the truth. Mrs. Clement, sensing her friend's resolve, hovered anxiously as Miss Marple penned a note to Inspector Craddock, requesting a meeting at the Rose and Crown that evening. "Jane, you're not going to confront them all, are you?" she asked, her hands clasped tightly. "It's too dangerous. What if the killer is among them?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, her smile serene. "Oh, Agnes, there's no danger in a bit of conversation, not when the truth is ready to come out. Like the time in St. Mary Mead when we caught young Mr. Harris stealing from the church funds. It was a quiet chat that did it, not a chase. I've asked Inspector Craddock to bring Mrs. Baxter, Mr. Rudd, Mr. Gray, and Mr. Ward to the inn's parlor. The cellar's secrets, I think, will speak tonight." The Rose and Crown was a somber silhouette against the darkening sky as Miss Marple arrived, her umbrella tucked under her arm despite the clear evening. Inspector Craddock was waiting in the taproom, his lean frame tense but his eyes sharp with anticipation. The four suspects were already seated in the parlor, a small, dimly lit room with its faded hunting prints and tarnished mirror. Eliza Baxter sat stiffly, her morning dress dark against her pale face. Tom Rudd slouched in a corner, his sullen expression masking a nervous energy. Lawrence Gray stood by the window, his polished manners fraying at the edges. Silas Ward, his burly frame filling a chair, gripped the armrests, his ruddy face set in a wary frown. Craddock cleared his throat, his notebook open but untouched. "Miss Marple, You said you had something to share. I've brought everyone here, as you asked, though I'm not sure what you're expecting. We've been over their stories a dozen times. Miss Marple stepped forward, her small figure commanding the room with a quiet authority. Thank you, Inspector. And thank you all for coming. I know this has been a trying time, but I believe we can put an end to the mystery of poor Mr. Baxter's death. It's a matter of seeing the pattern. You see, like a piece of knitting, each stitch must fit, or the whole thing unravels. Eliza Baxter's eyes narrowed, her hands tightening in her lap. What pattern, Miss Marple? The police have questioned us endlessly. If you've something to say it plainly. Miss Marple's smile was gentle, but her gaze was keen. Very well, Mrs. Baxter. Let us start with the night of the murder. Mr. Baxter was found in the cellar, bludgeoned with a poker from this very hearth, his hidden box of gold sovereigns missing. Each of you had reason to resent him, and each of you was near the cellar that night. But the truth lies not in anger or opportunity alone, it lies in greed. She turned to Eliza, her voice soft but unwavering. Mrs. Baxter, you were upstairs. You say, asleep under the influence of laudanum. A convenient excuse, perhaps, for a woman trapped in an unhappy marriage. Your quarrels with your husband were well known, and his tight grip on the purse strings must have chafed. But laudanum or no, you lived above the cellar, and the stairs are not so far. Yet I believe you when you say you heard nothing, for your grief, though guarded, is real. You did not kill him. Eliza's lips parted, a faint flush rising to her cheeks, but she said nothing, her eyes dropping to her hands. Miss Marple's gaze shifted to Tom Rudd, who stiffened under her scrutiny. Mr. Rudd, your resentment of Mr. Baxter was no secret. He docked your wages, belittled you, and you knew of the box in the cellar, saw him counting those coins. You were seen near the inn after midnight, despite claiming you went home. I believe you did return, perhaps for a forgotten coat as you said, and you saw Mr. Baxter alive, as you told me. But you lacked the nerve for murder or for theft. Your anger was real, but it was not enough to drive you to such an act. Tom's shoulders slumped, relief mingling with his sullenness, though his eyes remained wary. She turned to Silas Ward, whose hands tightened on the armrests, his face reddening. Mr. Ward, your brewery's troubles gave you ample reason to resent Mr. Baxter. He owed you £50 a fortune to a man on the brink. Your cart was seen late at the inn, and your anger that night was fierce. You argued with him, as you admitted, and saw him with his box of sovereigns. But you are a practical man, Mr. Ward, not a reckless one. Murder would risk too much, and I believe you left him alive, as you said, though perhaps not without regret. Silas exhaled heavily, his broad frame relaxing slightly, though his eyes flicked to the others, as if gauging their reactions. Finally, Miss Marple's gaze settled on Lawrence Gray, who stood rigid by the window, his polished facade cracking. Under her steady scrutiny, Mr. Gray, you are the enigma here. A writer you claim, yet your novel is as vague as your reasons for staying at the inn. You were seen sneaking out one night, carrying a satchel, your boots muddy, and your manner furtive. You told me you met a publisher, but I think not. I think you knew of Mr. Baxter's box, perhaps from a careless word he let slip in a drunken moment. You returned to the inn that night, not to write, but to steal. You took the poker from the hearth, went to the cellar, and struck Mr. Baxter down not out of anger, but to cover a robbery. The sovereigns were your prize, hidden in that satchel. You guard so closely. Gray's face drained of color, his hands clenching into fists. That's absurd, he burst out, his voice sharp with panic. I was writing, I told you. I never touched that box or Baxter. You've no proof. Miss Marple's voice remained calm, her eyes unwavering. Proof, Mr. Gray. The proof is in your satchel, I suspect, and in the ash you left in the cellar, a smudge from the hearth, carried on your shoes as you fled. Inspector Craddock, if You'd be so kind as to examine that satchel. I believe you'll find the sovereigns, wrapped perhaps in those manuscript pages Mr. Gray claims to carry." Gray lunged for the door, his movements swift but desperate, only to be intercepted by the constable, who had slipped into the room at Craddock's signal. Craddock opened the satchel, revealing a bundle wrapped in paper. He unwrapped it, and the glint of gold sovereigns caught the light, drawing gasps from the others. Beneath the coins were papers, not a manuscript, but forged letters of credit, their ink matching the smudge on Gray's cuff. "It was you," Eliza whispered, her voice breaking. "You killed him for a handful of coins." Gray's shoulders sagged, his defiance crumbling. "I didn't mean to kill him," he muttered, his voice low. "I just wanted the money." He caught me at the box, lunged at Maya, panicked, grabbed the poker. It was over before I knew it. Craddock snapped his notebook shut, his face grim. "Lawrence Gray, you're under arrest for the murder of Henry Baxter. Constable, take him away." As Gray was led out, the parlor fell silent, the weight of the truth settling over the room. Eliza's eyes brimmed with tears. Tom stared at the floor, and Silas shook his head, muttering under his breath. Miss Marple gathered her knitting bag, her expression serene but tinged with sadness. Back at the vicarage, Mrs. Clement was waiting, her face alight with curiosity. "Jane, what happened? Did you solve it?" "Oh, tell me everything." Miss Marple settled into her armchair, her needles resuming their rhythm. "It was Mr. Gray, Agnes, as I suspected. Greed, you see, is a simple motive, but it leaves such clear tracks. Like young Mr. Ellis in St. Mary Mead, who stole a silver candlestick and thought no one would notice. The sovereigns were his aim, and the murder a desperate act to cover it." Mrs. Clement's eyes widened. "And the others? They're innocent." "Innocent of murder, perhaps," Miss Marple said softly, "but not of their own secrets. People are so predictable, my dear, yet so surprising. The truth always shows. If you watch the stitches, as the fire crackled in the vicarage hearth." Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on the rose and crown, its cellar now silent, its secrets laid bare. The tapestry was complete, and St. Mary's Hollow could rest until the next thread unraveled.